It was a sight that should have been comforting, a construction site bustling with life, just across the street from the hospital room where 2-year-old Vivien lay. But when her mother noticed the workers watching her daughter every morning, little did she know that the act of kindness they were about to offer would change their lives forever. At just 2.5 years old, Vivien Keith was a force of nature. She had a boundless curiosity, the kind that made her chase butterflies in the backyard and giggle uncontrollably at the sight of bubbles floating in the wind. Her world was vibrant, filled with playgrounds, bedtime stories, and endless hugs from her mother, Ginger. But one day, without warning, that colorful world began to fade. It started subtly, a persistent fatigue, a few too many bruises on her tiny arms that didn't seem to heal. Then came the unexplained fevers, the way her energy would drain after just a few minutes of playing. Ginger dismissed it at first. She's just going through a phase, she told herself, but deep down, an unsettling feeling gnawed at her heart. Everything changed with a single doctor's visit. The air in the pediatrician's office was heavy, and the doctor's expression, once warm and reassuring, turned grim. "We need to run more tests," he said. Tests led to consultations. Consultations led to a devastating truth: acute lymphoblastic leukemia. 3 words that shattered their world in an instant. Ginger barely remembered the ride home that day. Her mind replayed the doctor's voice like a broken record. Leukemia, a word that sounded foreign, yet now it was an unwelcome intruder in their lives. Within days, Vivien's energetic laughter was replaced by quiet whimpers. Her once sun-kissed skin paled under the hospital's fluorescent lights, and the life she once knew, the laughter, the running, the endless discoveries, was exchanged for 4 drips and the beeping of medical monitors. The day the diagnosis came, Ginger held onto Vivien a little tighter, her tears silent but relentless. She couldn't show fear, not when her baby girl was staring up at her with wide, innocent eyes, too young to comprehend the gravity of it all. The doctors spoke in measured tones, careful not to overwhelm, but every word landed like a blow. Chemotherapy, isolation, long-term treatment plans. Ginger listened, nodding mechanically, her mind swimming with questions she couldn't bring herself to ask. Vivien, oblivious to the enormity of what was happening, clung to her favorite stuffed bunny and swung her legs off the hospital bed, humming a tune only she could hear. She didn't know what cancer meant. She didn't understand why everyone suddenly looked at her with eyes full of pity and sadness. The following weeks were a blur of sterile corridors, medical jargon, and the rhythmic hiss of oxygen machines. Nurses came and went, their voices soothing but distant. Vivien's world had shrunk to the confines of her hospital room, and yet, she remained unaware of the weight of it all. She just wanted to go home. Ginger, however, knew there was no going home anytime soon. The reality was harsh. Isolation, rounds of chemotherapy, and the lingering uncertainty that hung over them like a shadow. She spent nights staring at the ceiling, clutching her daughter's tiny hand, praying for miracles she wasn't sure would ever come. Days blurred into nights in the small hospital room. The walls were painted with cheerful animal murals, but they couldn't mask the sterile smell of antiseptic and medicine. The room was filled with beeping machines, blinking monitors, and the faint hum of activity from the hallways outside. For a 2-year-old, the world had suddenly become very small. No more playgrounds, no more afternoon walks in the park, just the confines of a hospital bed and the steady view of the world beyond her window. And it was that window that became her lifeline. At first, it was just a distraction, a glimpse of the outside world beyond her sterile prison. The construction site across the street was bustling with activity. Towering cranes swung overhead. Workers in bright vests moved like tiny figures in a storybook. Vivien pressed her tiny palms against the cool glass, watching with wide eyes as steel beams were lifted, trucks rumbled, and the world outside continued without her. Each morning, as Ginger helped her sit up in bed, Vivien's first instinct was to look outside. She found comfort in the rhythmic movement of the workers, the predictable routine of their day. She started waving, at first shyly, then with more enthusiasm. Some days they didn't notice, but when they did, A friendly wave back would light up her pale little face with the brightest smile. It became a routine, a moment of connection to a world she could no longer touch. For Ginger, that window was both a blessing and a curse. It was a reminder of the life her daughter was missing, of the carefree days that were stolen away. But for Vivien, it was a source of endless fascination. Through that glass, she saw hope. She saw life. Little did she know, someone was watching her too. And soon, the construction workers across the street would change her world in ways she could never have imagined. At first, the construction site outside Vivien's hospital window was nothing more than a fleeting distraction. Towering cranes, rumbling trucks, and workers in hard hats moving about like characters in a silent movie. The rhythmic clang of steel and the steady hum of machinery became the background music to her long days confined in bed. But for Vivien, it was more than just noise. It was life, life beyond the sterile walls of her hospital room. Each morning, as the sun spilled through the window, she would prop herself up on her pillows, her small hands gripping the edges of the bed rail. Her eyes, once dull and weary, would brighten as she gazed out at the bustling world beyond the glass. She studied everything. The way the cranes lifted heavy beams, the way workers communicated with subtle hand gestures, the way the dust would swirl in the early morning light. Then one day, almost instinctively, she waved. It was a small, tentative movement, but it felt monumental. She pressed her tiny fingers against the glass and lifted her hand, offering a hopeful hello to the men who seemed so far away yet strangely close. For a moment, nothing happened. The workers were too busy, too focused on their tasks to notice the little face behind the window. But Vivien didn't give up. Every morning, she repeated the gesture. A soft wave, a hopeful glance. And then, one morning, something changed. A worker in a bright yellow vest looked up. His eyes met hers, and without hesitation, he lifted his gloved hand and waved back. Vivien's face lit up in a way that Ginger hadn't seen in weeks. The exhaustion, the discomfort, the uncertainty, just for that moment, melted away. From then on, the wave became part of their unspoken routine. Day after day, rain or shine, Vivien waited by the window. And every day, without fail, at least one of the workers would wave back. Sometimes they added a little flair, a quick salute, a thumbs up, a funny dance move that made Vivien giggle uncontrollably. For the first time in a long time, she had something to look forward to. Among the crew working on the towering structure across the street were Greg C. and Travis Barnes, two men who couldn't have been more different, yet shared an unspoken understanding when it came to the little girl in the window. Greg was a burly man in his 40s, with sun-weathered skin and a deep, gravelly voice. He had been in construction for over 2 decades, his hands calloused from years of hard work. But behind his tough exterior, he was a father who once knew the unbearable fear of sitting in a hospital waiting room, hoping for good news. Travis, on the other hand, was younger, still full of optimism and dreams. His own daughter had just turned 3, and every time he saw Vivien waving from that window, he couldn't help but think of his little girl back home. At first, they had noticed Vivien's tiny hand pressed against the window and waved back absent-mindedly. But over time, their curiosity grew. Who was this little girl? Why was she always there? It didn't take long for them to realize. She wasn't just watching them. She was relying on them. "She's got leukemia," one of the hospital staff mentioned to them one day, passing by the site. Greg felt his heart sink. He had seen the toll that illness could take on a family, and the thought of that little girl fighting such a battle made his chest tighten. That evening, as they packed up their tools, an idea formed in Travis' mind. "What if," he said, scribbling on a scrap piece of paper, "we leave her a message?" Greg nodded in silent agreement. That night, armed with a piece of chalk, they scrawled 3 simple words onto a steel beam facing Vivien's window. "Get well soon." The next morning, when Vivien saw the message, her eyes widened, and a broad smile spread across her face. Ginger gasped, pressing a hand to her mouth, overwhelmed by the unexpected kindness. Ginger had always been protective of Vivien, more so now than ever. The sterile hospital walls had become their new normal, and outside those walls, The world felt unpredictable and even a little threatening. So when she first noticed the construction workers watching Vivien through the window, her heart clenched with unease. Were they just curious? Or was it something more? She tried to ignore it at first, telling herself they were simply going about their work. But she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Each time Vivien pressed her tiny hand against the glass and waved, Ginger's stomach twisted in knots. One morning, as she adjusted the blinds to let in the pale morning light, she caught sight of two workers, standing a little longer than usual, whispering to each other and gesturing toward Vivien's window. Ginger felt her pulse quicken. Her maternal instincts kicked in, and she instinctively pulled her daughter closer. Why do they keep looking? She wondered, a mix of anxiety and exhaustion clouding her thoughts. But then, something unexpected happened. The next day, there it was, written in bold, uneven chalk on a steel beam facing their window. Get well soon. The words were simple, almost hastily scrawled, but to Ginger, they might as well have been etched in gold. Her breath caught in her throat, and tears welled in her eyes. She covered her mouth with one hand, her other instinctively reaching for Vivien. Vivien's reaction was instant. "Mommy, they wrote to me," she squealed, pressing her tiny nose against the window. Her little face lit up with pure joy, eyes wide and filled with a hope Ginger hadn't seen in so long. Ginger wiped away a tear and managed a soft smile, her heart swelling with gratitude. For weeks, she had been fighting an invisible war, balancing fear and strength, despair and resilience. But in that moment, she realized they weren't alone. The simple gesture from complete strangers had breathed new life into their world. It wasn't just about the words themselves. It was what they represented: compassion, kindness, and a reminder that even in their darkest days, the world outside hadn't forgotten them. Later that day, she snapped a picture of the message and posted it on her social media. She wasn't expecting much, just a small post for friends and family, a way to share something positive amid all the chaos. But within hours, it became something more. The photo started getting shared. Messages began pouring in, words of encouragement, virtual hugs, and stories from other parents who had walked the same heartbreaking path. The overwhelming response was a balm to Ginger's weary soul. She read every comment, every message, clutching her phone tightly in the dimly lit hospital room. It felt like the entire world had gathered around them, holding them up in ways she never imagined possible. Vivien, blissfully unaware of the viral storm brewing, only cared about one thing: whether her construction worker friends would wave again tomorrow. And they did. Every single day. Ginger's post didn't just touch friends and family, it spread like wildfire. It started locally. Parents at St. Louis Children's Hospital shared the post, expressing their own struggles and gratitude for the small moments of joy amidst their pain. Then it reached the larger community. And then, it took off. National news outlets picked up the story. First, a local station reached out to Ginger, wanting to feature Vivien's story in their evening news segment. Then came the bigger names: morning talk shows, social media influencers, and even celebrities who resonated with the heartwarming tale. Vivien's window had become a symbol of something bigger than illness. It was hope personified. People from all walks of life reached out to show their support. Strangers from across the country sent letters, hand-drawn cards, and small gifts to the hospital, all addressed to the little girl in the window. A group of local school children sent a huge banner decorated with colorful handprints and the words, "Stay strong, Vivien." Even the construction workers were caught off guard by the response. One morning, as Greg and Travis arrived at the site, they found a small crowd gathered outside: reporters, camera crews, and dozens of people holding signs that read, "Thank you for spreading kindness." Greg scratched his head in disbelief. "We were just trying to make her smile," he said humbly when asked about the gesture. "Didn't think it'd turn into all this." Travis, on the other hand, couldn't help but smile. It just goes to show, kindness is contagious. Social media platforms were flooded with hashtags: Get Well Vivien, Building Hope, Small Acts, Big Impact. The hospital administration even held a small event to honor the construction crew for their kindness. They presented them with a framed photo of Vivien waving from her window, a reminder of how one small gesture could touch thousands of lives. But perhaps the most heartwarming response came from other parents of children battling similar illnesses. One message stood out to Ginger in particular. It was from a mother in another state who had a son undergoing treatment for leukemia. "Your story reminded me to find joy in the little things. My son waves to the janitors every morning now, and they wave back. Thank you for reminding us that kindness is everywhere." Ginger held her phone tightly, tears streaming down her cheeks. Vivien, of course, remained blissfully unaware of her newfound fame. For her, it was simple. She had friends outside her window who cared, and that was all that mattered. As the story continued to circulate, donations flooded into the hospital's pediatric oncology department, funding research and support programs for families like Ginger and Vivien's. And yet, amidst all the attention, the heart of the story remained the same. A little girl, a window, and the silent connection that changed everything. Each morning, before the sun fully rose over the city skyline, Vivien's eyes would flutter open with an eagerness that hadn't existed before. No longer did she wake up to the sterile silence of the hospital room with a sense of dread. Instead, her first instinct was to glance at the window, her window, to see if her friends in hard hats were already there. She would sit up in bed, her tiny hands gripping the bedsheets tightly, eyes scanning the construction site with hopeful anticipation. The moment she spotted the familiar bright vests and the distant wave of a gloved hand, a radiant smile would spread across her face. Every morning, without fail, she would wave. And without fail, they would wave back. But Vivien wanted to do more. She wanted to talk to them, to tell them how much their simple gestures meant to her. One afternoon, with her mother's help, she started practicing her letters on a piece of paper. The task was painstakingly slow, her little hands trembling slightly, but determination flickered in her eyes. The next morning, with trembling excitement, Vivien held up a carefully written message against the window in large, uneven letters. "Thank you." The response was instantaneous. One of the workers, recognizing the sign, gave a dramatic thumbs up and pointed at the message, pretending to wipe a tear from his eye. Another wrote back on a spare piece of cardboard. "You're strong." Vivien giggled, hugging the sign close to her chest as if it were a precious treasure. The exchange became a daily ritual. Short but sweet messages passed back and forth between a little girl trapped in a hospital room and a group of strangers who had become unexpected friends. For Ginger, watching Vivien's excitement bloom was a miracle in itself. The workers had become more than just a distraction. They were a source of joy, a reminder that kindness could bridge even the greatest distances. One morning, the window felt different. The usual hum of the construction site was eerily absent. No workers moved about. No cranes swung overhead. The metal beams stood lifeless, like forgotten skeletons of a half-finished dream. Vivien pressed her face against the cool glass, her eyes scanning every inch of the site, searching for the familiar neon vests and hard hats. But they weren't there. A frown crept across her little face, and her small fingers tapped anxiously against the glass. "Mommy, where did they go?" she asked, her voice small, uncertain. Ginger's heart sank. She had seen the power of those simple daily interactions, how they had lifted Vivien's spirits, given her something to hold onto amidst the chaos of her treatment. And now, in their absence, a heavy silence filled the room. Throughout the day, Vivien's usual bubbly energy waned. She kept glancing at the window, waiting, hoping. The Ford drip beeped quietly beside her, but even the soft humming of the hospital couldn't mask the disappointment that lingered in the air. By evening, tears welled in Vivien's eyes. "Do you think they forgot about me?" she whispered, clutching her stuffed bunny. Ginger kissed her forehead, brushing a stray curl away. "No, sweetheart. They'll be back. Sometimes people just need a little time." But deep inside, Ginger couldn't shake the worry creeping into her heart. What if they didn't come back? What if this was over? Vivien eventually drifted to sleep, but even in her dreams, her hands remained close to the window, as if afraid to miss a moment. The following morning, just as the first rays of sunlight spilled through the window, a sudden movement outside caught Ginger's eye. There they were. Not just Greg and Travis, but the entire construction crew. standing in a line, facing Vivien's window. And they weren't empty-handed. In their grasp was a massive handmade banner, held high between two steel beams, with bold, colorful letters painted across it. "We miss you, Vivien. Stay strong." Tears streamed down Ginger's face as she gently shook Vivien awake. "Look, honey, they're back." Vivien's eyes fluttered open, and for a moment, she stared in disbelief. Then, her face exploded with pure joy. She let out an excited squeal and began waving frantically with both hands. The workers waved back with exaggerated enthusiasm, some even jumping in excitement. The nurses and doctors gathered around the window, watching the heartwarming display unfold. Some took pictures, others simply stood in awe of the kindness unfolding before them. One of the workers stepped forward with a megaphone, his voice booming across the street. "We've got a special delivery for the bravest girl we know." A small crane lifted a box gently towards the window, holding a stuffed toy in a construction vest and a card filled with signatures and well wishes from the entire crew. Ginger opened the window just enough to receive the gift, tears rolling down her cheeks. "Thank you," she mouthed, placing her hand over her heart. Vivien clutched the stuffed toy to her chest, a wide smile lighting up her pale face. She turned to Ginger and whispered, "Mommy, they didn't forget me." And just like that, hope was restored. In that moment, it didn't matter that she was sick, that the hospital had become her world. What mattered was that outside, beyond those walls, there were people who cared. And that made all the difference. Vivien's life within the hospital walls was never the same after that moment. The simple yet profound act of kindness from the construction workers had planted a seed of hope within her heart, something that medicine alone couldn't provide. Each morning, she woke up with a renewed sense of excitement, eager to see what her friends across the street might do next. The once monotonous days filled with treatments and tests were now punctuated with moments of pure joy. She felt loved, seen, and most importantly, she felt hopeful. Her doctors began to notice a change. There was a newfound energy in her, a light that shone brighter despite the challenges she faced. Her laughter echoed more often in the sterile hallways, and for the first time in a long while, Ginger dared to believe in the possibility of better days ahead. But the impact of this small act of kindness didn't stop at Vivien's hospital room. Her story traveled beyond the confines of St. Louis Children's Hospital, touching the hearts of thousands across the world. People shared the story, not just because it was touching, but because it reminded them of something essential: the power of human connection, the beauty of empathy, and the incredible strength that could be found in the smallest acts of love. From classrooms to offices, from hospital wards to social media timelines, Vivien's story became a beacon of hope. It reminded everyone that, in a world often overshadowed by negativity, there were still stories of goodness waiting to be told. This story isn't just about a little girl and a group of construction workers. It's about all of us. It's a reminder that sometimes, the smallest gestures can have the biggest impact. A wave, a smile, a simple message scrawled on a steel beam. These acts of kindness may seem trivial in the grand scheme of things, but to someone facing their darkest days, they can mean the world. Vivien's story teaches us that we all have the power to brighten someone's day, to restore their faith in humanity, to give them a reason to smile when they least expect it. It challenges us to ask ourselves, when was the last time we took a moment to show kindness to a stranger? How often do we underestimate the power of our words and actions? What if we chose to be the reason someone feels hopeful today? Ginger once thought she was alone in her struggle, but this experience showed her, and all of us, that kindness knows no boundaries, and hope can be found in the most unexpected places. Let Vivien's story be more than just a heartwarming moment. It should serve as a call to action. Let's all take a step toward making the world a little kinder, a little brighter. Whether it's a kind word, a helping hand, or simply acknowledging someone's struggles, we have the power to make a difference. Because in the end, it's the little things that truly make the biggest impact. No act of kindness, no matter how small, is ever wasted. What will your small act of kindness be today? Vivien's story serves as a powerful reminder of the impact small acts of kindness can have on others. In a world often overshadowed by challenges, The simple gesture of construction workers waving at a little girl in a hospital room transformed her days and filled her with hope. It shows us that no matter how insignificant an act may seem, it can spark a sense of connection, healing, and resilience in someone's life. This story calls on all of us to be mindful of the power we hold in our actions, reminding us that even the smallest gestures can inspire, uplift, and change someone's world.